Truth. Tring tring, tring tring. Akash answered the phone, only to hear the voice of an unknown stranger, speaking in a very formal tone. "Good afternoon. This is the Express Bank calling. May I speak to Mr. Mehta?" Akash turned towards his father, who was standing right beside him, carefully overhearing the phone call. He vehemently refused to come towards the phone, wringing his hands, and instead whispered, "Tell them I'm out of town." Why, it was too hot to get into a long conversation about finances so early in the morning. Putting on his most grown-up voice, Akash repeated the same to the man on the other side and then politely ended the call. But that wasn't the end of the matter. The very next day, Mr. Mehta was urgently phoned to school, and he hurried along, wondering what had gone wrong and hoping against hope that nothing had happened to his son. Akash's teacher met him. She was a rather firm and strict woman. She said, "Akash bunked 2 lectures this morning. He instructed his friends to tell us he was sick while he wandered around in the corridors. We maintain a very strict no-lying policy in school. Is this the behavior he is being taught?" Mr. Mehta was shocked, not to mention embarrassed. "Akash, what is this that I'm hearing? Why are you lying? Have not your mother and I taught you that lying is bad?" But with all the innocence of a doe-eyed deer, Akash smiled calmly and replied, "Daddy, it was too hot to study mathematics so early in the morning. Besides, I thought we were allowed to lie as you did to the Express Bank man yesterday." Akash's of everyday. Children are innocent and pure. They imitate and mimic the things they see their elders, and especially their parents, do. We often see them playing with toy cell phones, holding long conversations, just like when they see their father talking to his boss. The girls observe how their mother keeps the house clean, or maybe gives tea parties, and they incorporate that in keeping their dollhouses neat and giving their teddy bears a party. So much so that a friend of mine used to remove the shoes off her dolls and line them up neatly outside the dollhouse before allowing them to enter, which was a habit practiced in her home. The Akash of our story represents all the naive children of the world. He did not lie to teach his father a lesson, nor was his answer supposed to be sarcastic in any way. He was stating what he had observed. Children learn not through words but actions. So when his parents had tried to teach him not to lie, and when his father unwittingly instructed him to lie, Akash observed and repeated the action over the words. This is because the truth is lived, not taught. Origin and meaning of the quote. Hermann Karl Hesse was a German-born poet, author, and painter. He believed that the deity is within a person, not in books or ideas. Almost all of his works explored an individual's search for authenticity, self-knowledge, and spirituality. He acknowledged publicly that the truth must be experienced, not just taught. His books included Siddhartha, Demian, Beneath the Wheel, Narcissus, and Goldmund, and several others. Hermann was the one responsible for this quote. He penned it down in his book The Glass Bead Game. In the context of the book, the main character, Joseph Knecht, is conversing with a great master. He asks for an understanding, a real and valid doctrine, and complains about how everything is contradictory and tangential. The master responds to him with an offer of truth. He advises him not to wait for a perfect doctrine, but instead to long for the perfection of himself. Truth is lived, not taught, and hence he must be prepared for conflicts. Difference between teaching and living. As Roy T. Bennett, the chairman of the Ohio Republican Party, had once said, some things can never be taught, they must be experienced. You never learn the most valuable lessons in life unless you go through your own journey. A taught thing will never have life in it. It will always remain non-living. What we learn gains life only when it is lived in actuality. When we live a truth, we can understand it completely. We undergo those circumstances, and we discern the matter ourselves. Whether or not the matter happening at hand is true or false, it is always better understood when it has been lived through. We can teach a child that fire is hot, but we cannot teach what hot exactly is. We could say it burns, but then again, the child won't know what that is without experiencing it. Unless the child lives through it and feels the heat radiating out of the fire, they will never really learn that fire is hot. Just as a qualitative term needs to be lived through to be understood, so must the truth be lived in that regard. Truth of teachers and masters. The truth is not some information, or, rather, some bookish knowledge that teachers can force in, or more likely, crammed into our heads. Instead, it is an experience that is learned by implementing it in our everyday behaviors and personality, which, in short, is living it. Truth, when lived, can have an everlasting influence. For example, a child can be taught alphabets, numbers, and rhymes. But in their life, they regularly use alphabets and numbers. They live through it, and it will remain in their minds forever. However, the same cannot be said for the rhymes, for they are taught the rhymes only once. It does not remain in their minds for too long, because they do not recall it regularly. Though a child must be taught everything, they absorb the thing only when they start living with it. A sage, who practices his life by the truth, will always refuse to teach others. Why, might you ask? It is simply because the truth can never be taught. The sage will never be a teacher. He might be a master, certainly, but he will never make himself a teacher. Conclusion. Suffering, or the loss of any precious thing, is not the truth to be lived. The truth to be lived is to face the hardships that come from spiritual learning. Truth, like knowledge, is surprisingly difficult to define. We seem to rely on it almost every moment of every day, and it is very close to us. Yet, it isn't easy to define the truth, because as soon as you think you have it pinned down, some case or counterexample immediately shows the other possibilities. The truth is a process from the womb to the tomb, the cradle to the grave. The Greek word for truth is aletheia, which means to unhide or hiding nothing. It conveys the thought that truth is always there, always open and available for all to see, with nothing being hidden or obscured. The Hebrew word for truth is emeth, which means firmness, constancy, and duration. Such a definition implies an everlasting substance and something that can be relied upon. To conclude, I would like to quote Shakespeare in Hamlet, wherein he wrote, "This above all, to thine own self be true, and it must follow, as the night the day, thou canst not then be false to any man." The simple translation says that above all things, be true to yourself. And by the laws of nature, just as night follows day, the fact follows that you will be true to your fellow man too,